Okay, so this is going to be a video where I break down some of my most effective techniques in order to study for coding interviews using Leetcode and several other sources as well, actually. It's so important to make sure that you're studying the most relevant questions for your specific level. Are you going for an internship or a new grad position? If so, then you're going to want to spend a lot of time investing and learning just different problems that involve string manipulation. Positions that are a little bit higher than that, maybe a more general software engineering position that's not a new grad position, then heavily invest in like breadth first search, depth first search, dynamic programming as well. And a way that you can actually really ensure that you are looking at the most relevant questions for your company is by either checking out the tags by using Leetcode Premium, or also there's another free resource that I will link down in the description that has actually taken a lot of the Leetcode tags that you have to pay for and put them in a free list. So I'll link that down in the description below for you to leverage in your study. Another way you can prioritize what you study is by looking at Leetcode's top 100 most liked problems. In general, on Leetcode, you really want to try to go after the problems that have a super high like to dislike ratio. Most often, if a problem has a ton of dislikes, it's because either the Leetcode solution explanation is terrible, the problem statement itself is pretty terrible or confusing, or just in general, that problem is not super useful or doesn't pop up very frequently in a lot of technical interviews. And so, definitely be aware of those dislike counters, because in general, they're not going to lead you astray. I will say that recently, much more now than in prior years, Leetcode is super leaning into this getting users to pay for premium mentality. And so there's definitely a lot of features like frequency, like company tags that they're putting behind a paywall. I'm gonna try my best on this channel to provide a lot of those resources for free, which is just in general another reason why you should subscribe. But definitely keep that in mind and don't be discouraged about that. If you don't have the resources to pay for Leetcode Premium, you can definitely get a job in tech without Leetcode Premium, and that's just my honest opinion. So kind of doing your research, collecting all this information I think is going to be super important, because it's going to allow you to kind of dodge a lot of Leetcode fatigue. It's going to keep you from being overwhelmed when you're studying. It's going to help you feel less like you're just jumping around randomly trying to solve different problems. It's going to provide, some more structure for your interview process. And just in general, I think making sure that you study and use your time effectively in a focused way by asking yourself what's most relevant for me is going to allow you to, right off the bat, have the most success. Okay, from there, go ahead and start off with working through a lot of the Leetcode easy problems. And it's okay if you have to spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even on Leetcode easy problems, because that's going to provide you such a great, awesome foundation for Leetcode mediums and hards. A lot of times the Leetcode medium questions are medium because you have to use maybe 2 or 3 of the strategies or algorithms that you may have learned for Leetcode easy problems in one problem. And that's kind of the hard complexity. And then Leetcode hard problems are that way because you might have to use 1 or 2 strategies that you learned from Leetcode mediums into the hard problem. So everything pretty much builds off of each other. And so giving yourself that time to really understand and feel a lot more comfortable in Leetcode easies is just going to give you that edge to be able to move on to even harder problems with a lot less stress. After this, I think it's super important to focus on, as much as possible, simulating the real world environment when you study and kind of when you do your mock test prep for interviews. There's a super easy way to start to really simulate what you're going to do in an interview is just decide what you're going to do in an interview right off the bat. So this means that from the beginning, try to establish the exact same rhythm, the exact same habits when you start off when you want to start off your interview as you do when you practice. When I was studying for interviews, something that I did was I always made sure to reread the problem. After that, I always made sure to write down my constraints of the problem and confirm that with the interviewer. When I was practicing, I would just confirm it with the Leetcode or whatever, but I would always do that second. Third, I would always try to take into account any keywords of the problem, any hints or buzzwords, and then actually remember, okay, so for this type of problem generally, what are some edge cases that I should look out for? And then think of some test cases that would make sense for that. I did those 3 things consistently, and I would always study in the same location, and I would always try to leverage the exact same study reference materials, either like taped up on my wall or whatever. Everything was pretty much the same every time I studied, and this made it very nice and easy when I actually had an interview that was especially like a technical phone screen, because everything felt the same. So that's kind of how I hacked simulating a real world environment. And I think you could definitely do a similar thing in your study to allow yourself to feel less anxious and to really condition yourself every single time that you practice to get into that interview mode and that interview mindset. Here's an algorithm that you can use to actually walk through coding problems the most effectively when you're studying, and you can also tailor it to whatever your needs are specifically once you try it out. So the first thing that you are going to want to do is, of course, read the problem, possibly reread the problem, and search for any buzzwords or anything that could allow you to have a better idea what the solution could be. Make sure to really spend time chewing through and digesting the problem, and then give yourself that opportunity to think of a solution. From this point, if you ever find yourself stuck for more than like 15 minutes and you actually just cannot go any further, instead of spending another hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours being in that stuck state, just go ahead and look at the solution. If you're working on a Leetcode problem where the solution is locked away, it's fairly straightforward a lot of times to find some solutions either by Googling online. You can also go to Geeks for Geeks, and even especially there are some really good solutions in the Leetcode discussions for a lot of problems where the solution is otherwise locked away. So I think it's really key, if you do that, to make sure that you're looking for solutions that look pretty clean and are fairly easy to follow and aren't any kind of, maybe Python one-liners or anything else that is just generally super confusing. So just make sure that at the most, you're only allowing yourself to spend 15 minutes super stuck. And in total, my personal take is that I think it's super important to, at the most, only spend about 45 minutes working on a single problem in terms of, coding, working, thinking of that algorithm solo on a single problem. And, if you spend after 45 minutes, unless you're deep within actually coding up a real workable solution, go ahead and look at the solution. Now, when you look at the solution, and this part is super, super key, like if you actually stop watching before this part, you'll probably screw yourself over. But yeah, when you look at the solution, make sure that you are taking notes on the problem, noticing the characteristics of the problem. Some questions that you can ask yourself and write down in your notes are some of the following, right? What are some key giveaways within the problem statement that this was most likely going to be the solution? What are any potential bugs that you need to look out for? Or if you were able to code up a solution to the problem and you did have a bug, make sure you write that down and remember that, so that you know to look out for that and to be aware of that when you code up other solutions that are somewhat similar. In general, also take note of any edge cases that might be really important to this particular problem. And, as much as possible, try to really invest in your notes. These notes that you take of the problem statement and the solution that you see and the trends and patterns that you see between those two are going to be your learning foundation for the rest of your interview prep. And, another tip that I would also recommend is go ahead and feel free to use pen and paper to write down these notes as well, if that is what's going to allow you to really learn this information in order to really kind of like get this information down pat. Use a whiteboard, use pen and paper, use whatever you need to do. Use Notion, use Google Docs, use whatever format you need in order to actually build up these awesome notes and this knowledge foundation that's going to allow you to really plow through the rest of these problems. And so from there, once you've reviewed a clean solution, whether that be on Geeks for Geeks or in the Leetcode discussion forum, go ahead and go back to Leetcode and try to implement that solution from memory, occasionally taking a peek when you need to really kind of get through that solution and get it working. Another important step is, once you have it down in that moment, in that instance, just go ahead and like delete that code and then try again a couple days later. You will notice a couple days later when you retry this problem that you'll be trying to remember the solution that you wrote down and the solution that you reviewed in your notes. and trying to recall that in order to actually solve that problem again in that particular moment. And that is a good thing. In fact, that's a great thing. And that's because it's going to allow you to do so many things. One, it's really going to allow you to lean into how natural human memory works. We learn things through recall, and that's why you'll see a lot of things like flashcards work so well. And the more and more you can work through coding up a solution to a problem, just the easier time you're going to have going through and seeing new problems and kind of remembering, okay, this new problem is new, but it actually almost reminds me of another solution that I wrote. And let me see if I can use any learnings from that other solution that I wrote in order to actually solve this new problem. Another reason why I really like this approach is that by time limiting yourself to 45 minutes, of, almost like struggle bus time when you're coding in the beginning, and then just going ahead and looking at the solution and taking notes, you're going to actually force yourself to become exposed to so many more problems than if you just spent like 3 hours on one single problem. And by exposing yourself to much more problems, you're going to have an easier time seeing the trends, seeing those patterns, being able to connect the dots for you personally, and that's only going to accelerate your growth and learning throughout this whole entire process. The third reason why I like this process is honestly, it's fairly similar to what I did in school to study, and most likely it's going to be similar to what you did in school to study and understand information as well. Now, a very different approach from what I'm recommending in this video is actually to struggle for hours on a single problem and really try to like grind through to figure it out. And ultimately, I just think this is such a surefire way to get burnt out. I think that when we learn how to do new skills, whether it's learning a new language or whether it's learning how to fix toilets, we don't just like sit there and think really, really hard and think ourselves into a black hole and then all of a sudden have like eureka moments. Oftentimes, it really involves doing things. It really involves seeing how things are done, and it involves actually going through and being exposed to a lot of different experiences, a lot of different examples before we can kind of get things down pat, right? It's like, when you have a child and you sit the child down and you actually teach it the letters of the alphabet, you don't spontaneously expect it to think really hard and then just start spouting out like English language. You have to actually show the child it's just several different examples of English, talk to the child, and that child is eventually going to really start to learn that language because of that practice. And so this is why I don't recommend that, even though you might see a lot of people tell you to go ahead and struggle for hours on a single problem. I just don't think it's the most effective way. But if you disagree, feel free to put it down in the comments. I'm totally happy, and I just want people to learn however best they learn, kind of based on their particular learning style. Eventually, you'll kind of reach this, really almost like graduation phase of the process, and that is that you'll get to this point where you will be able to practice these problems independently. You will be able to just go ahead and figure out solutions without having to look at your notes or depend on them as much, purely through the practice. And, at this point in the process, I think it's really important to focus on bug-free code, to focus on getting comfortable, potentially talking out your process. And, if you did all of the prior work that I mentioned in this video, a lot of that should be fairly easy because you can really, again, start to lean on that knowledge foundation, start to lean on the notes that you wrote and leverage that by really kind of almost talking verbatim, most likely. Whatever you were writing down in order to figure out, for this problem, it makes the most sense to use a map, or it makes the most sense to start using a stack or arrays. You can just talk that out and explain that to your interviewer, and that's going to prove to them that you have some kind of thought process for how you approach problems and that you're fairly knowledgeable about actually having a real technique for handling ambiguity. If you find yourself, working a lot and not necessarily getting to a stage where you can work on problems novelly, then that could be a sign that there is some gaps in your knowledge, and that's totally okay, right? This whole thing is about working and trying and trial and error. So potentially it could mean that you need to spend a little bit more time either learning a coding language more deeply so that you have that initial very, very beginning foundation to get to the point where you're actually working on algorithm problems. And then the other thing that I might recommend is that also, if things aren't necessarily clicking, then it could be because you don't necessarily have as much of a foundation in Big O, which is also totally okay. And I'll link several resources down in the description for you to learn these things in the most effective way that works for you. But my number one advice is to don't get discouraged. This entire channel is dedicated to you and dedicated to making sure that you have the support system that you need in order to do well in your process. So feel free to comment down below if you have any further questions, or hit me up on Twitter. I'm on Twitter pretty often. So if you just mention me in a tweet, I'll most likely respond within a day, as long as it's not something that is just totally unreasonable or mean. But yeah, just go ahead. You can do this. Trust in your process. And if there's anything else I can do, anything other video that you guys want to see, make sure to comment down below and let me know. And I'll be sure to have that content out as soon as possible.